It was a great day to die. At least, that's what Captain Riven told himself as he stomped down the grimy corridor of the Elysium Dawn. The ship was a relic, and like most relics, it preferred to die a slow, painful death rather than go out in a blaze of glory. That was its prerogative. Riven's job was to keep it limping along for just a few more years, or at least until someone else inherited this floating metal coffin. "Captain," the voice of Lyra crackled over the comms. Lyra was the ship's engineer, a title she wore with as much pride as one might wear a pair of 2-day-old socks. "We've got a situation." "Of course we do," Riven muttered to himself, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Tell me, is it the kind of situation where I become a hero, or the kind where we all die horrifically?" "It's more of a we might all die scenario," Lyra replied, her tone equally sardonic. "One of the systems caught a whiff of sabotage. Someone's been tinkering with the ship." Riven stopped mid-stride, as if the universe had suddenly decided to slap him with a cosmic joke. Sabotage. Couldn't even let me have my coffee first, could they? The Elysium Dawn was docked at a space elevator, a massive structure connecting the orbiting station to the planet below like a cosmic straw. It was supposed to be a routine stop, the kind that makes you wish for a nice, relaxing death. But then again, when was anything ever routine in deep space? He found Lyra elbow-deep in wires and circuits in the engine room, her fingers dancing over the controls like a pianist playing a requiem for broken machines. "Where's the sabotage?" Riven asked, leaning against the bulkhead with the casual indifference of someone who's seen too much to care too deeply. "Right here." She pointed to a panel that looked like it had been chewed on by a particularly ravenous space weasel. "Someone's been playing games with the life support and navigation systems, not to mention the fact that the elevator itself looks like it's ready to throw in the towel." Riven rubbed his forehead. "Great. So we've got a flying death trap inside a bigger flying death trap." "Pretty much," Lyra replied, her voice carrying the kind of enthusiasm reserved for tax audits and dental work. "And let me guess," Riven continued, "the Glarn are about to show up and demand we hand over whatever resources we don't have. You catch on quick, Captain." Lyra smirked, wiping her hands on a rag that was less clean than the floor. "We've got about an hour before they arrive, according to the latest intel." Riven hated the Glarn, not in the vigorous, passionate way that leads to epic battles and heroic deeds, but in the way one hates a persistent rash. The Glarn were predictable in their unpredictability, possessed of the unique ability to make a bad situation worse simply by existing. "So," Riven said, clapping his hands together with mock enthusiasm, "we've got sabotage, a failing space elevator, and a horde of aliens on the way. It's like someone's trying to make my life exciting." Lyra shrugged. "You did say you were bored last week." "Remind me to stop saying things like that," Riven replied, shaking his head. "What's our best option here?" "Well," Lyra said, ticking off options on her fingers, "we could try to fix the sabotage, hope the elevator doesn't decide to become a death trap, and then somehow negotiate with the Glarn. Or we could just accept our fate and prepare for the grand finale. You're a real optimist, you know that." "I try," Lyra said with a wink. "Guess we better start tinkering and pray to whatever gods are listening that we don't blow up." Riven chuckled, despite himself. "I think they stopped listening a long time ago, Lyra, but sure, let's give it a shot." As they worked, the ship groaned around them like an old man getting out of bed. The Elysium Dawn had seen better days, but those days were long gone, replaced by endless repairs and the kind of problems that made you long for a simpler time, like the apocalypse. "Who do you think's behind the sabotage?" Lyra asked, her voice muffled by the panel she was half crawling into. "Could be anyone," Riven replied, tapping a few buttons and watching as they unhelpfully refused to respond. "The universe is full of people who hate us after all." "True," Lyra agreed, her voice echoing from inside the machine. "But why now?" Riven had no answer for that. He didn't know why someone would choose now of all times to sabotage their mission. Maybe it was personal, maybe it was political, or maybe it was just because they could. In the great cosmic scheme of things, motives often seemed as irrelevant as decency. They worked in silence for a while, broken only by the occasional curse as something sparked or refused to cooperate. Outside, the space elevator loomed like a gaunt finger pointing accusingly at the stars. "All right," Lyra said finally, emerging with a victorious grin. "That should hold." Riven arched an eyebrow, looking at the precariously patched-together system that was now their only lifeline. "Define hold," Lyra shrugged. "Long enough to make us look like heroes or idiots, depending on how things go." "Well, that's reassuring," Riven said dryly, then turned serious. "Time to deal with the Glarn." "Think they'll be in a chatty mood?" Lyra asked, standing up and stretching her back, a chorus of pops and cracks accompanying the movement. "Doubtful," Riven replied, checking his sidearm. "But it never hurts to try. Maybe we'll get lucky and they'll just want to talk about the weather." They made their way to the bridge, the ship's lights flickering ominously. The Glarn ships were already on the scanners, a menacing cloud of technological superiority about to rain on their already dismal parade. "Open a channel," Riven ordered, settling into the captain's chair with the grace of a man about to face a firing squad. Lyra complied, and moments later, the view screen filled with the bulbous, unsettling visage of a Glarn leader. It looked somewhat like an octopus that had been rejected by nature for being too unsettling. "Human vessel," the Glarn began, its voice a guttural rasp that seemed to scrape against the eardrums. "You will surrender your resources or face obliteration." Riven smiled, a thin, humorless curve of his lips. "Ah, good to see you too. We were just in the middle of some sabotage, so if you could come back later." The Glarn's eyes narrowed, or at least appeared to narrow, hard to tell when they had no visible eyelids. "You mock us, human." "Mock? Never," Riven said innocently. "I just thought we'd start with some pleasantries before you tried to kill us." The Glarn made a noise that could have been a laugh or a death rattle. "You have one ire to comply." "Generous of you," Riven replied, maintaining his easygoing facade. "We'll give it some thought." The screen went dark, leaving Riven and Lyra alone with their thoughts and a rapidly ticking clock. "Well," Lyra said, breaking the silence, that went about as well as expected. Riven sighed. "Yep, time for Plan B." "Which is?" "Haven't figured that part out yet," Riven admitted. "Work in progress." "Right," Lyra said, shaking her head in mock disbelief. "Remind me again why I'm here." "To make me look competent," Riven replied with a grin. "You're failing spectacularly," Lyra shot back. Riven chuckled, though his mind was racing. They needed a plan, something to buy time, something to keep the Glarn from turning them into space debris. He glanced at the console, the myriad of buttons and lights that might as well have been labeled "Press here to die." "We could try faking a systems failure," Lyra suggested, her voice thoughtful. "Make them think we're already dead in the water." "Not bad," Riven said slowly. "But they'd probably see through it." "Well, unless you've got a better idea," Lyra said, throwing her hands up, "we're running out of options." "Story of my life," Riven muttered. "Okay, let's set it up, but keep the weapons ready." Together, they began manipulating the ship systems, sending out a signal of distress that would hopefully make the Glarn hesitate. It was a risky move, one that could backfire spectacularly, like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. As they worked, Riven couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something, some crucial piece of the puzzle that would explain why everything was going wrong at once. But introspection would have to wait. "Lyra," Riven said suddenly, "what if the sabotage was meant to happen now? What if someone knew the Glarn would be here?" Lyra paused, her hands stilling over the controls. "You think someone's working with them?" "It's possible," Riven replied, his mind racing. "Someone who wants us out of the picture." "Great," Lyra said, rolling her eyes. "Because things weren't complicated enough." Riven nodded grimly. "Just another day in paradise." The console beeped, indicating the Glarn were trying to re-establish contact. It seemed their bluff was about to be called. "Here we go," Riven said, taking a deep breath. "Let's see if our luck holds." The screen flickered to life again, the Glarn leader's face appearing like a malevolent specter. "What is this trickery, human?" Riven shrugged. No trickery. Just bad luck, the Glarn's eyes narrowed. We will give you one last chance to comply. Riven met its gaze, a wry smile playing on his lips. Or what? The Glarn leaned closer, its voice a low, menacing growl. Or we will finish what someone has already started. Riven felt his heart skip. So they did know. The game was afoot and they were playing against stacked odds. But for Captain Riven and Engineer Lyra, that was just another Tuesday. All right, Riven said, voice steady despite the tension. We're open to negotiations. And with those words, the real battle began. Riven leaned back in his chair, staring at the blank view screen with the kind of intensity usually reserved for contemplating existential dread or a suspiciously high utility bill. Negotiating with the Glarn was like playing chess with a homicidal squid, except every piece was a potential landmine, and the board was on fire. Lyra, Riven said, breaking the silence with a weary sigh, let's pretend for a second that we're not completely screwed. What are our odds of actually fixing this? Lyra, who had been juggling a wrench in one hand and her sanity in the other, turned from the mess of wires she was attempting to untangle. Odds? I'd say about as good as finding a polite politician or a clean public restroom. Great, Riven muttered. Just the kind of odds I love. With a quick glance at the ship's diagnostics, Lyra frowned. Well, looks like our propulsion system's taken a hit. Could be sabotage or just the ship's version of a midlife crisis. Can it be fixed? Riven asked, already dreading the answer. Lyra shrugged, giving him a smile that was more grimace than reassurance. Sure, if by fixed you mean held together with duct tape and prayers. Riven rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of the universe and a few particularly persistent migraines pressing down on him. And the Glarn, still sniffing around like vultures at a roadside buffet, Lyra said, her voice tinged with the kind of cheer reserved for funerals. Wonderful, Riven replied, feigning enthusiasm. Guess we'd better figure out what they want, besides our impending demise. Just then the comm system crackled to life, a sound like the universe clearing its throat. Human vessel, this is the Glarn command. You have 30 minutes left. Lyra rolled her eyes. Friendly bunch, aren't they? I wonder if they send get-well-soon cards with death threats. Riven responded, his tone casual as if discussing the weather. This is Captain Riven. What's the rush? Got an appointment at the end of the galaxy. The Glarn's reply was as warm as a glacier. We require your resources for survival. Refusal will result in your destruction. Clear and concise, Lyra murmured. I appreciate the lack of ambiguity. Riven scratched his chin, considering. Why do they need our resources? They usually just destroy everything and move on like a cosmic swarm of locusts. Lyra shrugged. Maybe they are on a diet, or maybe, her eyes widened slightly. Maybe they really are starving. Riven blinked. Starving, the Glarn, aren't they supposed to be all-powerful conquerors with a side of invincible? Even conquerors need dinner, Lyra replied dryly. Maybe their supply lines got cut or something. Or maybe their chef quit. Riven smirked, but the idea gnawed at him. What if they're desperate enough to negotiate? Lyra snorted. You think they'd sit down for tea and biscuits before turning us into space dust? Desperate times, desperate measures, Riven said, staring out the viewport at the distant silhouette of Glarn ships. If they're as desperate as we are, then maybe we have something to offer, Lyra finished, her expression shifting from sarcasm to curiosity. But what? Our charm and good looks, Riven chuckled. Our charm could use some work, but information, tactics, they might be worth something. Or we could just offer them Lyra's famous engine oil soup, Lyra quipped. Guaranteed to lubricate your insides. Now there's a pitch, Riven replied, shaking his head. All right, let's see just how hungry they are. He turned back to the comms, feeling like a gambler down to his last chip. Glarn command, we want to negotiate. We might have information that could help you. The response was as swift as it was skeptical. What information could you possibly possess that we do not? Riven hesitated, then replied, we know other human territories with resources, places you could conquer without firing a shot. Lyra gave him a look that was part admiration, part horror. You realize if this doesn't work, they'll just kill us, right? Riven shrugged. They were going to do that anyway. Might as well try to buy some time. There was a pause on the comms, a silence heavy with suspicion. Finally, the Glarn spoke again. Very well, we will discuss terms, but know this, any deceit will result in your immediate destruction. Understood, Riven said, nodding towards Lyra. Prepare for a meeting. Let's see if we can charm a squid. Lyra snorted. Hope they like sarcasm, because we're fresh out of everything else. As they waited, Riven couldn't shake the feeling that the sabotage and the Glarn's desperation were connected. Someone had orchestrated this chaos, but who? And why? The ship groaned again, reminding Riven of an elderly man standing up after a long nap. He glanced at Lyra, who was busy coaxing the propulsion system into something resembling functionality. How's it looking? Like a Picasso painting, but with wires, Lyra replied. It'll hold, but if anyone sneezes too hard, all bets are off. Then let's hope the Glarn have good manners, Riven said, his voice laced with dry amusement. The console beeped again, signaling the Glarn's readiness to communicate. Riven took a deep breath, steeling himself for the negotiation ahead. All right, let's do this. The view screen flickered to life, revealing the Glarn leader's unsettling visage once more. Human, we are prepared to listen, but do not waste our time. Riven smiled thinly. Wouldn't dream of it, so here's the deal. We know of unprotected human settlements, places that won't put up much of a fight. The Glarn leader's eyes seemed to glisten with interest. And you would betray your own kind. Riven shrugged nonchalantly. Desperate times and all that. Besides, survival trumps loyalty. Lyra shot him a look that said, I hope you know what you're doing. The Glarn leader paused, clearly weighing the offer. And what do you want in return? Riven leaned forward, every ounce of charm he could muster in his voice. An alliance, or at the very least, a ceasefire. We help you, you let us live. A mutually beneficial arrangement. The Glarn leader considered, its tentacles twitching in thought. We will consider your proposal, but you must understand, trust is not a currency we value. Who does? Riven replied with a smirk. But sometimes you have to spend what you've got. The Glarn leader let out a sound that could have been a chuckle or indigestion. Very well, we will deliberate. Expect our response shortly. The screen went dark, leaving Riven and Lyra alone once more. That was a bold move, Lyra said, her voice a mix of admiration and disbelief. Offering them other targets like that. Riven shrugged again, his expression thoughtful. We needed something to bargain with. Besides, better them than us. Spoken like a true survivor, Lyra replied, her words laced with both sarcasm and respect. Let's hope they buy it. Riven nodded, knowing full well that their lives hung by the thinnest of threads. In the meantime, see if you can squeeze a bit more life out of our propulsion. Just in case. Already on it, Lyra said, diving back into the tangled mess of machinery with a determination that bordered on obsession. As Riven watched her work, he couldn't help but reflect on the nature of their predicament. Caught between a rock and a hard place, with only their wits and a dubious charm to see them through. It was almost poetic in a grim sort of way. Almost. Riven, Lyra said suddenly, her voice breaking through his thoughts, you ever wonder if we're actually the bad guys? He considered the question, tilting his head. All the time. But then I remember everyone's the villain in someone else's story. She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. True enough. Let's just hope we're not the villains in our own. Wouldn't that be a twist? Riven said with a dry chuckle. The ship groaned again, as if in agreement, the sound echoing through the corridors like the ghost of a laugh. The Glarn's deadline loomed ever closer, and with it, the promise of either salvation or annihilation. But for now, all they could do was wait, and hope that their gamble would pay off. Hey, Lyra, Riven said suddenly, breaking the silence that had settled over them like a shroud. Yeah, remind me to never take up gambling. She snorted, glancing at him with a twinkle in her eye. I'll add it to the list, right under don't trust aliens and avoid getting vaporized. Riven laughed, a short, sharp sound that cut through the tension like a knife. Good plan. And so they waited, two humans adrift in a sea of uncertainty, clinging to the hope that they could outwit their foes long enough to see another sunrise, or whatever passed for one in the cold, unfeeling void of space. The console beeped again, a sound that filled the room with both dread and anticipation. Time was running out, and the Glarn's verdict would soon determine their fate. "Ready?" Riven asked, glancing at Lyra. "Born ready," she replied, a fierce grin lighting up her face. "Let's go see if the universe is feeling generous." With a nod, Riven activated the comms, feeling the weight of 1,000 possibilities hanging over him like the sword of Damocles. The view screen flickered to life once more, the Glarn leader's visage filling the screen like a verdict. "Human vessel," the Glarn intoned, its voice carrying the weight of a decision made. "We have considered your proposal." "And?" Riven prompted, his voice steady despite the storm of uncertainty raging within him. The Glarn paused, letting the tension stretch out like a taut wire. "We accept your terms." Riven exhaled, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. "Glad to hear it. But know this," the Glarn continued, its eyes narrowing slightly. "Deceive us, and there will be no corner of the galaxy where you can hide." Riven nodded, the gravity of the situation pressing down on him once more. "Understood. But for now, let's focus on what we can achieve together." The Glarn leader inclined its head, a gesture that could have meant anything from agreement to indigestion. "Very well, we will establish a temporary ceasefire. Use this time wisely." The screen went dark, leaving Riven and Lyra to stare at each other in the dim light of the bridge. "Well," Lyra said, breaking the silence, "that was less catastrophic than expected." Riven chuckled, feeling a flicker of hope amid the sea of uncertainty. "I'll take less catastrophic over utter annihilation any day," she grinned, clapping him on the shoulder. "Let's hope this alliance doesn't explode in our faces." "With our luck," Riven replied, a wry smile quirking his lips. "Wouldn't be surprised." But for now they had a reprieve, a precious sliver of time to regroup, repair, and maybe, just maybe, turn the tide in their favor. As they set about their tasks, the Elysium dawn groaned once more, a sound that spoke of stubborn resilience and the promise of another day. And for Riven and Lyra, that was enough. Riven leaned back, rubbing his temples as the comms went dark. "Well, that went better than expected. Which means it'll all go to hell soon enough." Lyra glanced up from her spot, a tangle of wires in her hands like some kind of techno-macrame. "You're an optimist, you know that. In a universe this bleak, you gotta be. Anyway, can you make sure the propulsion system doesn't decide to take a coffee break already on it? This thing's held together with spit and prayer." Lyra rolled her eyes, though there was a flicker of determination in them. "I'll get it humming, or at least grumbling less." The ship's intercom crackled, a harsh reminder of its age. "Captain Riven, there's something you might want to see on the view screen. Urgently." Riven frowned, exchanging a quick look with Lyra. "What now?" "Aliens, mutiny, or the coffee machines finally given up the ghost. Could be all three," Lyra said, lips twitching into a smirk as she turned back to her work. Making his way to the view screen, Riven tried to ignore the sense of impending doom creeping up his spine. As the screen flickered on, his suspicions were confirmed. The Glarn weren't known for patience, and their ships hung outside like a bad omen. "Glarn command," Riven said into the comms, forcing some charm into his voice. "I thought we had a deal, and yet here we are," came the reply, smooth as broken glass. "Your information was deemed insufficient." Riven sighed, his shoulders slumping. "What a shocker." "You aliens ever just take someone's word for it?" "Rarely," the Glarn responded. "Prepare for boarding. We will inspect your vessel for treachery." Riven muted the comms and stared at the screen. "Wonderful. They're gonna pick through our junk. Any chance we can make them slip on an oil spill?" Lyra appeared beside him, wiping her hands on a rag. "How about we give them an experience they won't forget?" "I'm listening," Riven said, arching a brow. "Human psychology," Lyra began, tapping her temple. "We're unpredictable, emotional. What if we use that against them? And how would we do that? Play on their fears. Make them think we're more unstable than a reactor on meltdown. Show them emotion as a weapon. They'll never see it coming." Riven rubbed his chin, intrigued despite himself. "Scare them off with feelings. Lyra, that's diabolical. I like it. Better than just sitting here and waiting to be gutted. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? We die anyway, Riven chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. We've got nothing to lose and everything to gain. Let's give it a shot. As they moved through the ship, Riven called out to the crew. All right, everyone, change of plans. We're going to give our guests a grand tour of human madness. There were murmurs of confusion, but Riven quickly explained the plan. Think about every bad day you've ever had. Every frustration, every rage-filled moment. Channel it. We're about to put on a show. The crew exchanged looks ranging from skeptical to amused, but one by one, they nodded. Riven's ragtag bunch might not be the best, but they were certainly unpredictable. As the Glarn ship docked, Riven and Lyra positioned themselves near the airlock. Ready? Riven asked, glancing at his companion. As I'll ever be, Lyra replied, smirking. Let's show these squids what happens when you piss off a human. The airlock hissed open, revealing a handful of Glarn warriors, their tentacles twitching as they moved with eerie grace. They filed in, their eyes scanning the room. Riven stepped forward, adopting an air of casual madness. Welcome aboard the Elysium Dawn. Please excuse the mess, we're allergic to tidiness. The Glarn leader, an imposing figure with a scar running down its face, tilted its head. We are here to inspect, cooperate, or face annihilation. Oh, annihilation. Lovely this time of year, Riven said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. But before you do, why not join us for some good old-fashioned human hospitality? Lyra chimed in, her grin wide. You know, to get a real feel for who we are. The Glarn hesitated, their eyes flicking between Riven, Lyra, and the rest of the crew who were slowly starting to gather. Riven seized the moment, spreading his arms wide. Ever heard of a human meltdown? No. Well, you're in for a treat. And with that, the crew erupted into chaos. Shouting, laughing, crying, each member seemed to be engaged in their own private breakdown. Riven himself started ranting about the futility of existence, while Lyra smashed her tools on the floor, shouting about propulsion systems that just didn't understand her. The Glarn, clearly unprepared for the display of raw emotion, shifted uneasily. Their leader raised a hand, attempting to command silence, but it seemed the chaos was infectious. One of their own started to mimic the humans, its tentacles flailing wildly. See. Riven shouted over the din, pointing at the mimicking Glarn. Even your own kind is catching the human spirit. The Glarn leader's eyes narrowed, a shiver of uncertainty passing through its tentacles. This is madness, precisely, Lyra said, stepping forward with an expression that could only be described as crazed delight. Welcome to humanity. The leader's confidence faltered. It turned to its men, muttering something in their own language. The effect was immediate. Two of the Glarn backed up, clearly unnerved. Riven took a step closer, bringing his voice down to a conspiratorial whisper. What's it gonna be, O mighty conqueror? Because trust me, there's more where this came from. The Glarn leader hesitated, its resolve visibly cracking under the strain of such unbridled chaos. Finally, it lowered its tentacles, signaling the retreat. This is not over, human. Oh, I'm counting on it, Riven replied with a grin that was all teeth and no humor. The Glarn retreated, the airlock hissing shut behind them, leaving the humans standing in the aftermath of their own manufactured chaos. Lyra let out a breath, her shoulders sagging with relief. Well, I can't believe that actually worked. Riven shrugged, wiping a mock tear from his eye. We're not out of the woods yet, but it's a start. Hopefully they'll think twice before poking the human bear again. The crew, now gathered in silence, looked at each other, a sense of camaraderie binding them tighter than any command could. Lyra glanced at Riven, an unreadable expression on her face. You think they'll come back? Riven sighed, running a hand through his hair. Eventually. But maybe, just maybe, we've bought ourselves enough time to come up with another plan. Or at least patch up the ship so it doesn't explode in our faces. Good enough for me, Lyra said, already turning back to her tools. Let's get to work before the universe decides to test our luck again. Their victory, such as it was, felt like a small flame in the dark. But it was a flame nonetheless, and in a universe that seemed hell-bent on snuffing them out, That was no small thing. Riven took one last look at the closed airlock, a wry smile playing on his lips. Guess the universe isn't feeling that generous after all. But as the crew settled back into the rhythms of survival, there was a sense of something new in the air. A determination, a resilience born of necessity and stubborn human spirit. With any luck, it might just be enough to see them through. Lyra, Riven called out as he made his way back to the bridge. Don't forget to put scare-off aliens on our list of survival skills. Right under talking ships out of exploding, she replied, her voice echoing down the corridor. The Elysium Dawn shuddered beneath them, a ship that had seen better days but refused to capitulate. And for Riven and his crew, that was all they could ask for. As the stars continued their silent vigil outside the ship's hull, Riven found himself grinning despite the odds. After all, if humans were good at anything, it was playing the hand they'd been dealt, no matter how crappy the cards. Captain Riven stared at the blinking console in front of him like it owed him money. In the grand tradition of things going from bad to worse, the Elysium Dawn had just received the unwelcome news that the space elevator they were tethered to was beginning to collapse. He could feel the ship's shuddering protests under his boots, a gentle reminder that even in space, gravity is an absolute bastard. Well, isn't this just the cherry on our disaster sundae? Riven muttered, rubbing his temples in a futile attempt to stave off the impending headache. Lyra poked her head out from behind a panel, a smudge of grease streaked across her cheek. What's going on now? Don't tell me the espresso machines joined the rebellion. Worse, Riven replied, flicking a finger at the console. The space elevator's coming down, and unless we want a front row seat to a gravity-induced pancake, we need to get the hell out of Dodge. Lyra blinked, her eyes widening slightly in what could only be described as the universal expression of "Are you kidding me?" Of course, it'd be something like that. Any brilliant ideas, Captain, or do we start writing our eulogies? Riven snorted. I'm saving the eulogy writing for when I'm really out of options. Right now, we focus on Plan A. Hightail it out of here before the universe decides to test how much crap we can fit into one day. The ship's intercom crackled, a sound like a cat trying to play the bagpipes. Captain, the crew's ready for whatever plan you've cooked up. Good, Riven said, slamming his fist on the console button. All hands prepare for evacuation procedures, and someone keep an eye on Lyra. If she tries to take the engine apart, stop her. Lyra made a face. As if I'd dismantle my baby at a time like this. Anyway, I've been thinking, what if we try something different with these Glarn? You know, since we've got them on edge. What, you want to throw a surprise birthday party? Riven asked with a raised eyebrow. No, Joy, Lyra replied, gesturing vaguely as if that explained everything. You know, something they don't understand. We've seen how they react to chaos, but what if we hit them with happiness? Confuse the hell out of them while we make our getaway. Riven scratched his chin, considering the idea. So you're telling me we blast them with a feel-good montage and hope they short-circuit? Metaphorically, Lyra conceded. Think of it as the ultimate mood disruptor. They won't know what hit them. Riven nodded slowly, then smirked. Hell, why not? We've tried everything else. Let's dazzle them with our shining dispositions before the place comes crashing down. Right, Lyra said, already moving towards the ship's inner workings to rig something up. I'll pipe some cheerful tunes through the hull speakers. Maybe some happy visuals on the view screens too. Good. And while you're at it, make sure the propulsion system's ready to bolt. Once we get the Glarn off our backs, we're out of here, Riven ordered, tapping the console with a sense of urgency. Oh, and make sure nothing explodes in the process. Captain, you know me, Lyra said, tossing a wry smile over her shoulder. I only blow things up on Tuesdays. As Lyra busied herself with her plan, Riven turned his attention to the crew, who were bustling about, preparing for the imminent departure. He caught sight of a couple of the newer recruits, green around the gills and looking like they'd rather be anywhere but here. Hey, you two, Riven called, gesturing them over. They shuffled forward, trying to avoid eye contact, which was a feat considering the narrow corridor. Listen, whatever happens, just stick to the plan and keep your wits about you. This isn't our first rodeo. One of them, a wiry guy with an unfortunate haircut, nodded. Got it, Captain. We won't let you down. Good, because if anyone's screwing this up, it'll be me, Riven said, clapping them on the shoulder. Now get to your stations and remember, act like you've got the confidence of a man who just found out he's won the galactic lottery. As the crew dispersed to their various duties, the ship's systems groaned and whirred, barely managing to keep up with the demands placed upon them. Riven fiddled with the comms, broadcasting a message that was meant to sound motivational but came off more like a plea to the universe to cut them some slack. "Ladies and gentlemen and everything in between," he began, leaning into the mic. "This is your captain speaking. We're about to perform a little magic trick called not dying. So buckle up, keep your hands inside the vehicle, and let's see if we can make it out of this in one piece." The response came back as a series of cheers, grumbles, and a few sarcastic remarks, but Riven took it all in stride. After all, a crew that could still joke in the face of calamity was a crew worth fighting for. Lyra's voice crackled over the comms. "All set, Captain. We've got visuals and tunes ready to go as soon as those tentacled bastards get curious. Let's hope it's enough to get us out of this mess," Riven replied, his fingers dancing over the controls. "And if not, well, I've always wanted to see my name in the obituaries." As the Glarn ships loomed outside, the Elysium Dawn shivered, its systems strained to the breaking point. Riven watched as their unwelcome guests hung there, a silent threat waiting to be realized. "All right, Lyra, showtime," Riven instructed, bracing himself for whatever was about to unfold. With a flick of a switch, the Elysium Dawn's hull came alive with a cacophony of joy. Bright, cheerful music blasted out into the void, accompanied by a kaleidoscope of happy images on the view screens, children laughing, puppies frolicking, and for some reason, a dancing banana that looked suspiciously like it was on a sugar high. The Glarn ships paused, their movements hesitant, as though unsure how to process this unexpected barrage of happiness. Riven watched with a mix of amusement and anxiety as the alien ship seemed to falter. "How are they reacting?" Lyra's voice came through the comms, tense with anticipation. "Like they've just stumbled into the galaxy's worst kids' party," Riven replied, unable to suppress a grim smile. "Keep it up. They are either gonna flee or they'll join the Kangal line." Meanwhile, the space elevator continued its inevitable collapse, a slow-motion disaster that threatened to drag them all down with it. The clock was ticking, and Riven knew they had to act fast. "Prepare for emergency detachment," he ordered, his hands flying over the controls. "On my mark, we're getting out of here." The crew snapped into action, each member executing their assigned tasks with the kind of precision that only came from living on borrowed time. The ship groaned, its hull straining as it prepared to sever the tether that kept them tied to the doomed elevator. And then, with a shuddering lurch, the Elysium Dawn broke free, the sudden acceleration pressing everyone back into their seats. Riven held his breath, watching the Glarn ships on the view screen, waiting to see if their gamble had paid off. To his astonishment, the Glarn seemed to retreat, whether due to the confusion of their enemy's unexpected display of happiness or a simple tactical withdrawal. Riven didn't know, nor did he care. "Looks like we're in the clear," Lyra's voice came through, strained but victorious. "I don't know how long it'll last, but we bought ourselves some time." Riven let out a long breath, the tension slipping from his shoulders like a discarded coat. "I'll take it," he said, settling back into his chair with a sigh of relief. "Good work, everyone. Let's put some distance between us and the disaster zone." As the ship cruised away from the collapsing elevator, its structure crumbling silently in the vacuum of space, the crew allowed themselves a moment of respite. It wasn't a victory in the traditional sense, but it was a victory nonetheless. Riven watched the chaos fade into the distance, a grim smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Well, Lyra, looks like Joy's got a few tricks up its sleeve after all. Lyra chuckled. Who knew that the universe's most dangerous weapon would be a dancing banana? Next time, we'll just show them you're cooking, Riven joked, earning a mock punch on the shoulder from Lyra. But seriously, let's keep this moment in mind. If they come back, we'll have to be ready to play the mood ring of emotions again. As the crew settled back into something resembling normalcy, Riven couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something far larger. But for now, they were alive, and the Elysium Dawn had survived another day. And in a universe hell-bent on extinguishing their light, that was worth celebrating. Even if it was with dancing bananas and an optimistic smile. The Elysium Dawn shuddered as it limped away from the collapsing space elevator, a Titanic-sized reminder of just how often the universe loved to play cosmic pinball with their ship as the ball. The crew was scattered around the vessel like mismatched puzzle pieces, each trying to fit themselves into the picture of survival through grit and a general disregard for personal safety. Captain Riven paced in front of the main view screen, where the space elevator continued its terminal descent into planetary gravity. "Well, that's one way to avoid paying docking fees," he muttered, throwing a glance over his shoulder at Lyra. "How's the joy synthesis going? Or do I need to start promising the crew free drinks we don't have?" "Working on it," Lyra said, fiddling with a console that looked like it had been salvaged from a scrapyard, probably because it had. Her fingers danced over the keys with the dexterity of someone who'd disassembled and reassembled more tech than she'd ever care to admit. "But synthesizing joy isn't exactly like whipping up a batch of pancakes, Captain," Riven snorted. "Never said it was, but right now, pancakes sound more useful. Who knew happiness was such a finicky little bastard?" Lyra flashed a grin, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Right. Meanwhile, I've got a hull temperature that's flirting with spontaneous combustion and Glarn breathing down our necks like they are waiting for us to cough up dessert." The Glarn, those tentacled enigmas with all the charm of a tax audit, were regrouping. And frankly, Riven didn't feel like testing their patience today, or any day for that matter. Unfortunately, patience was about the only thing the Glarn ran out of faster than good vibes. "Captain," crackled a voice over the intercom, the faint echo of steel on steel underscoring the urgent tone. It was Jax, one of the ship's mechanics and a man who could swear in 6 different languages, none of which were particularly polite. The engine's hiccuping like it's had one too many shots of moonshine. "We need to give it a bit of love or at least some duct tape," Riven groaned, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Fantastic, just when I was starting to think we'd get a break. Can't you whisper sweet nothings to it or something?" "Already tried that," Jax replied dryly. "Turns out my seductive voice ain't what it used to be." Lyra, still focused on her console, chuckled. "That bad, huh? Well, I guess we're just gonna have to make do with our other assets." "Assets?" Riven echoed, arching a brow. "You mean we have something of value besides a ship held together by stubbornness and recycled optimism?" Finally, Lyra turned towards him, a half-smile playing on her lips. "You'd be surprised what people find valuable in the middle of a galactic screw-up. Even if it's just false hope and a playlist of peppy music." The Elysium Dawn's corridors hummed with the low murmur of worried voices, a chorus of unease that belied the gallows humor they clung to like a lifebuoy in a storm. The ship's diagnostics spat out error messages like an angry bar patron tossing insults at the bouncer. Riven took a deep breath, trying to ignore the knot in his stomach that told him they were one busted gasket away from drifting aimlessly into oblivion. "All right, folks," he said, keying the ship-wide comms. "I know things look bleak, but remember we've faced worse odds with even worse attitudes, so let's channel our inner cockroach and refuse to die." The crew's laughter echoed back, a little forced but heartfelt. It was a sound Riven treasured more than victory itself. After all, surviving was about the journey, not the destination, especially when the destination could be a moot point in the near future. Meanwhile, Lyra was muttering to herself, the kind of low-level grumble that suggested she was either on the verge of a breakthrough or a breakdown. If I can just reroute this, and maybe if I adjust that flux capacitor. Riven peered over her shoulder, eyebrows knitting together. You sure you know what you're doing, or are you just trying to impress the cosmos with your techno-wizardry? Lyra shrugged, wiping a smudge of grease off her cheek. Fake it till you make it, right? Isn't that the official motto of most of our escapades? Riven nodded, patting her shoulder. Pretty much. Just remember, if we end up in a dimension where everyone speaks in binary, I'm blaming you. Lyra laughed, a real one this time. Noted. But seriously, Captain, if we can keep the Glarn distracted long enough, maybe, just maybe, we can patch things up and get the hell out of Dodge. The Elysium Dawn shuddered again, a violent reminder that the universe had a sick sense of humor. Riven barely maintained his balance, cursing under his breath. Status report, he barked, spinning on his heel to face the crew members scrambling about like ants on caffeine. Shields are holding, but they're about as thin as the argument for synthetic coffee. One of the newer recruits piped up, their voice trembling slightly. And the Glarn? Riven asked, not really expecting a good answer. Still eyeing us like we're the last donut in the break room. Riven sighed, rubbing a hand over his stubbled jaw. All right, let's give them something to chew on. Lyra, how's that joy synthesis coming along? Almost there, she replied, fingers flying. Just need a little more time. Time's not exactly the luxury special on today's menu, Riven said, but he knew pressing her wouldn't make the ship go faster. Okay, keep at it. Meanwhile, let's see if we can convince the Glarn that they'd rather chase a comet than deal with us. The comms crackled again, this time with a garbled hiss that made Riven's skin crawl. The Glarn were trying to communicate, or at least he assumed so, since it sounded like a blender full of rocks was trying to sing opera. Captain, they're hailing us, Lyra said, pulling her attention away from her console long enough to glance at the viewscreen. Patch them through, Riven said, bracing himself for whatever fresh hell was about to spill from the comms. The screen flickered, and there they were, the Glarn ambassador, a creature with more tentacles than a cephalopod convention, and an expression that suggested it had just smelled something unpleasant. Probably humans. Human vessel, it gurgled, its voice like syrup over gravel. Your antics are peculiar. Peculiar is what we do best, Riven replied, arms folded across his chest as he stared down the viewscreen like he was daring it to blink first. Sorry if the light show wasn't to your taste. The Glarn's eyes narrowed, or the alien equivalent anyway. Your vessel and its primitive attempts at emotional manipulation are amusing but ineffective. Riven managed a thin smile. Well, if you're looking for effectiveness, you've come to the wrong place. We're more about surviving by the skin of our teeth. Skin? Teeth? The Glarn ambassador echoed, its tentacles twitching. Are these negotiation terms? Riven almost laughed at that. Almost. Not unless you're offering a dental plan. The Glarn were silent for a long moment, as if they were recalculating the madness that was humanity. Your vessel will soon disintegrate. Surrender, and you may be spared. Riven glanced at Lyra, who shook her head minutely. They weren't ready to bail just yet. And miss all this fun, Riven said, feigning nonchalance like it was his second skin. I think we'll pass on that generous offer. We still have a few tricks up our sleeves. Your defiance is noted, the Glarn responded, something akin to curiosity in its voice. Perhaps it is not weakness, but another human peculiarity, Riven shrugged. We're full of surprises. Maybe stick around a while longer and you'll learn a few. The screen went dark, the Glarn's presence replaced by the unsettlingly normal view of distant stars. Riven exhaled slowly. Well, that went better than expected for now, Captain, Lyra said, a hint of triumph in her voice. I think I've got it, the joy synthesis. It's done. Riven turned to her, brow raised. Really? Let's see if it can do more than just tickle the Glarn's curiosity. Lyra tapped a few commands into the console, and the ship thrummed with a new, almost energetic vibration. It wasn't much, but it was something. Okay, Riven said, feeling a flicker of hope he didn't quite trust. Let's see if this merry little tune can buy us enough breathing room to fix the engine and make a proper getaway. As the synthesized joy pulsed through the Elysium dawn, Riven watched the Glarn ships on the perimeter, their positions shifting ever so slightly. The tension in the ship was palpable, a tightrope walk over a pit with uncertain depths. "Are they reacting?" Lyra asked, her eyes darting to the nearest display. "Hard to say," Riven replied, "but at least they are not coming closer. Call that a win." "Small mercies," Lyra said, exhaling a breath she'd been holding. "Let's hope they are as susceptible to joy as they are to confusion." Riven chuckled without humor. "If they feel anything like we do, they're probably wondering what fresh insanity is about to befall them next." The Glarn ships hovered, indecision etched in their stances, if such a thing were possible. Riven took solace in the fact that no one seemed eager to make the first move, a testament to the power of well-timed chaos. "All right, Jax," Riven called over the intercom. "Let's see if you can coax that engine into giving us one more miracle. We're gonna need it." Jax's voice crackled back, tired but resolute. "On it, Captain. Just tell it we'll buy it a drink once we're out of this mess." Riven grinned, though it felt hollow against the backdrop of impending destruction. "I'll hold you to that." The crew was holding their breath, each member glued to their posts, eyes fixed on screens that displayed threats, hope, and the relentless passage of time. And Riven, standing at the helm, couldn't help but feel like they were all straws in a cosmic wind, waiting to be blown one way or another. Lyra tapped away at her console, the hum of technology mingling with the distant groans of the ship. "We'll make it through, Captain," she said, voice low but steady. "We always do." Riven nodded, though he wasn't sure if he believed it. "Let's hope the universe agrees, Lyra. Otherwise, it's going to be a very short, very explosive joyride." And with that, the Elysium Dawn barreled forward into the unknown, a tangle of human tenacity, synthetic joy, and the stubborn refusal to let the universe have the last laugh. The Elysium Dawn was having one of those days, the sort where its internal system sounded like a cat coughing up a hairball. Riven glanced at the flickering lights above, silently daring them to go out. They flickered back at him, unimpressed. "So, Lyra," Riven said, adjusting his captain's cap like it might somehow stabilize the chaos around him. "How's our little miracle machine coming along?" Lyra sat hunched over the joy synthesis console, her eyes darting between screens filled with graphs that meant nothing to anyone but her. "Would be faster if the universe could stop trying to kill us for 5 minutes. Ah, but then where's the fun in that?" Riven leaned against the console, careful not to jostle anything important. Last thing they needed was a joy bomb going off in the wrong direction. "Remember, we thrive on adversity. We thrive on coffee and sarcasm," Lyra shot back, though a hint of a smile tugged at her lips. "But hey, adversity's welcome to tag along." The ship shuddered again, proving that it had a perverse fondness for their bickering. Outside, the Glarn ships loomed ominously, an audience of alien critics just waiting for the grand finale. Riven found himself wishing they'd find a more engaging piece of cosmic theater to critique. "Jax," Riven called into the comms, "how's our engine looking?" "Like it went through a blender and forgot to tip the bartender," Jax replied, voice crackling with the static of barely suppressed rage. "I'm giving it the all-pep talk, though. You know how these things respond to a bit of sweet talk. If it works, I'll buy it roses," Riven said, though at this point he'd settle for a box of chocolates if it got them out of this mess. "Just keep us from becoming space debris, yeah. Don't worry, Captain. I might be a cynic, but I'm no quitter." Jax's voice carried a weary determination that Riven found oddly comforting. Lyra's fingers danced over the console, the sound of her work a rapid-fire beat in the otherwise tense quiet of the bridge. Her focus was absolute, the kind of laser-like precision usually reserved for surgeons and bomb diffusers. Or in this case, whatever the hell she was doing to make joy a tangible, weaponizable thing. "Got an idea," she said suddenly, not looking up. "If I can amplify the joy wave, we might just throw the Glarn off balance long enough to fix the propulsion, but it's risky." Risky was Riven's middle name. Actually, it was Aloysius, but nobody needed to know that. "What are we talking here? Mild dizziness or catastrophic existential crisis?" "Somewhere in between. Like a hangover but with more rainbows. I love rainbows, Riven said. Let's do it. But how much time are we talking? Minutes, Lyra replied. Maybe less if the universe has a sense of humor. That's a big if, Riven said, rubbing his temples. Okay, everyone, brace for impact or enlightenment, whatever comes first. Lyra initiated the joy wave and the ship thrummed with a strange, almost musical energy. Riven felt it wash over him like standing in the ocean surf and feeling the pull of the tide. It was unsettling, as if his mind was trying to reconcile the taste of happiness with the current menu of chaos. Outside, the Glarn ships wobbled, the alien equivalent of a double take. The ambassador's stern voice crackled over the comms, sounding almost woozy. Human vessel, what is this? Sensation. That, my tentacled friend, Riven said with a grin, is what we call joy. Enjoy it while it lasts. The Glarn ships hesitated, their movements uncertain. Riven could almost hear the gears in their alien brains struggling to process a concept so foreign and absurd. Now, Lyra, Riven said, urgency threading through his voice. Let's make this count. Lyra was already 2 steps ahead, her fingers flying over the console with a speed that would put most concert pianists to shame. Rerouting auxiliary power to the engines, she said, voice steady despite the chaos. If this doesn't work, we're back to plan B. Which is, pray to whatever cosmic deity hasn't abandoned us yet. Riven chuckled, though there was little humor in it. Always a solid backup plan. Jax's voice crackled over the comms again, bringing the faintest hint of hope. Captain, you're not gonna believe this, but I think it's working. She's purring like a kitten. Purring, huh? Let's hope she doesn't decide to cough up a hairball next, Riven said, feeling a strange cocktail of relief and disbelief. Keep her steady, Jax. All eyes were on the main viewscreen now, where the Glarn fleet seemed to be in a full-blown argument with themselves. Their ships shifted and fidgeted like they were trying to decide whether to engage in combat or a group therapy session. Riven seized the moment. All right, everyone, this is our window. Let's turn that joy into momentum and get the hell out of here. The Elysium Dawn's engines roared to life, and the ship surged forward with a determination that matched its crew. Riven felt the familiar push of acceleration, the kind that reassured him they were still in the game, still alive. Captain, Lyra said, a note of triumph in her voice. We're gaining distance. I think we did it. Think. Or no, Riven pressed, though he was already smiling. Definitely did it, Lyra affirmed, her grin infectious. Riven tapped the comms, addressing the whole ship. All right, folks, we've got a bit of breathing room, but let's not get complacent. We're not out of the woods yet. More like out of the frying pan, Jax interjected. And into the existential crisis, Riven quipped back, his spirits lifted by their camaraderie. But hey, wouldn't be us if we didn't make it interesting. The crew's laughter echoed once more, this time with genuine relief woven through the sound. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, they still had each other, and the universe hadn't quite managed to snuff out their stubborn flame. Anything on the Glarn comms, Lyra? Riven asked, a part of him still wary of their alien counterparts. Nothing but static on their end. Looks like they're still processing the joy wave. Good, Riven said, though he knew better than to assume they were completely in the clear. Let's keep our distance until we're sure they've lost interest. The Elysium Dawn continued its flight, the stars a blur outside the windows as they put as much space as possible between themselves and their erstwhile alien admirers. Riven allowed himself a moment to savor the small victory, though he knew it was far from over. So, what's next, Captain? Lyra asked, her curiosity tinged with the resigned acceptance of yet another looming crisis. Next, we regroup, Riven said, leaning back in his chair with a sigh. Take stock of where we are, repair what we can, and figure out what the hell we're gonna do about the sabotage. Think it was the Glarn? Lyra asked. Maybe, Riven replied. Or maybe someone closer to home. Either way, it's another mystery for another day. And here I was, hoping for a nice, quiet life of spacefaring, Lyra said with a mock pout. Quiet's overrated, Riven said, chuckling. Besides, where's the fun in that? The Elysium Dawn flew on, a battered ship with a resilient crew, defying the odds in a universe that would love nothing more than to see them fail. And yet, despite everything, they endured, scrappy, irreverent, and determined to forge their own path. Riven allowed himself a rare moment of introspection, watching the stars drift by like silent witnesses to their journey. He knew the road ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty, but as long as he had his crew, he knew they could face anything. And if the universe thought it could get the last laugh, well, it had another thing coming. After all, if Riven and his crew were going down, they'd do it with a smile, a middle finger to the cosmos, and a defiant cry of joy. Captain Riven reclined in his captain's chair, the leather protesting under his weight like an old man waking from an uncomfortable nap. The Elysium Dawn's latest debacle against the Glarn had been a close call, but Riven was nothing if not an expert in finding the silver lining in a cloud of cosmic debris. Today, that silver lining was the joy wave Lyra had unleashed, turning the Glarn fleet into a floating armada of confused euphoria. Lyra, the resident miracle worker and professional cynic, was still glued to her console. Her hands moved deftly, manipulating the joy synthesis console as though she was braiding a particularly unruly ponytail. "So, Captain, you ready to poison the Glarn's food supply with happiness? I mean, if rainbows don't work, we could always try toxic rain." "If anyone asks, it was an accident," Riven said, a smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth. "I like the idea of using happiness as a poison. Just don't start marketing it as a new diet plan." "Don't worry," Lyra quipped. "I'll throw in a side of existential dread as a chaser." Riven chuckled, glancing at the main view screen. The Glarn ships were still out there, hanging like forgotten Christmas decorations. Their usual menacing demeanor was noticeably absent, replaced instead by an air of befuddlement. If Riven squinted, he could almost see them scratching their gelatinous heads. "Think they'll go for it?" Lyra asked, her eyes fixed on the data streaming across her monitors. "Do I think they'll willingly ingest happiness? No. But do I think they'll unknowingly ingest it when we lace their food supply? Absolutely," Riven replied. "The Glarn have the survival instincts of a lemming on a bungee cord." Lyra raised an eyebrow. "That optimistic, optimism is just realism with a sugar coating," Riven said. "You start the process. I'll keep them distracted with a little negotiation." Lyra nodded, her fingers dancing over the console, initiating joy infusion into the Glarn's food supply. "Let's hope they enjoy their meal of emotional enlightenment." Riven tapped the comms, broadcasting to the Glarn ships. "Ambassador Grath," he said, his voice carrying the kind of unearned confidence that was his trademark. "I believe we got off on the wrong foot. We're all just trying to find a way to coexist in this vast universe, aren't we?" The comms crackled with static before the Glarn ambassador's voice came through, still tinged with the woozy aftermath of the joy wave. "Human vessel, your methods are unconventional." "Unconventional is just another word for effective," Riven replied, keeping his tone light. "I propose we set aside our hostilities and engage in a more amicable exchange. I hear joy is a great icebreaker." There was a pause, and Riven could almost picture the Glarn ambassador wrestling with an unexpected urge to giggle. "Your proposition is intriguing." "We shall deliberate. Take your time," Riven said, knowing full well patience wasn't a Glarn virtue. "Think about it over a nice, hearty meal." Lyra glanced up from her console, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Joy infusion is in full effect, Captain. Their food supply is now a buffet of goodwill." "Good," Riven said. "Let's see if we can turn this comedy of errors into a truce." Jax's voice crackled over the comms, a mix of skepticism and grudging admiration. "Using happiness as a weapon. Only you, Riven, would think of something so insane and make it work." "Insanity and genius are two sides of the same coin, Jax," Riven replied, grinning. "I just flip it more often than most." The Elysium Dawn settled into a tense waiting game, the crew's usual banter punctuated by glances at the view screen, where the Glarn ships hovered in indecision. Hours passed with the kind of slow, agonizing crawl that made people question their life choices, like ordering the suspiciously cheap sushi or trusting a politician. Finally, the comms chimed, and Ambassador Grath's voice resonated through the bridge once more. It held a peculiar warmth, as though the joy had seeped into his being, loosening whatever alien equivalent of a tie he wore. Human vessel, we have considered your offer. The effects of your joy wave have prompted a unique discussion among us. Riven leaned forward, sensing the shift in the air. And we propose a temporary ceasefire. This sensation is new and it requires further exploration, Grath said, sounding almost sheepish. Perhaps there is merit in understanding human emotions. Sounds like a plan, Riven replied, relief flooding through him. Let's call it an emotional exchange program. The Glarn ambassador hesitated. We shall agree to your terms, human Riven. But know this, should this joy prove deceptive, our response will be swift. Understood, Riven said, his voice firm. We're all just trying to find our place in the universe, Ambassador. Maybe we can do it without blowing each other to bits. The comms fell silent, leaving Riven and his crew to digest the unexpected turn of events. Lyra leaned back in her chair, a rare smile tugging at her lips. You did it, Captain. You turned an impending war into a peace treaty. Not bad for days' work, Riven said, though he knew the hard part was yet to come. Now we need to keep it that way. Jax's voice cut in, wry and sardonic as ever. And here I thought I'd signed up for a simple life of space maintenance. Instead, I get politics and interstellar diplomacy. Who knew? Welcome to the Elysium Dawn, Riven said. We specialize in subverting expectations. As the ship glided through the star-studded void, the sun casting intermittent glares across the hull, the crew found themselves with an unexpected breather. Riven allowed himself a moment to reflect on their unlikely victory. It was strange how easily a cosmic game of cat and mouse could be turned on its head by the simple, unpredictable power of a smile. But then the universe was ever capricious, and today, it seemed, it had chosen to laugh alongside them. Riven meandered over to Lyra's station. So what now? Do we throw a party for the Glarn or just keep feeding them joy-infused snacks? Maybe both, Lyra replied, lifting her gaze from the console. But just in case, I'll keep working on the joy synthesis. We might need some for ourselves. Riven nodded, his expression thoughtful. Prepare for the worst, hope for the best, and keep a bottle of joy on hand. Sounds like a plan, Lyra agreed, her smile widening. Here's to a few moments of peace before the next cosmic disaster. The crew settled back into their routine, though with an air of cautious optimism. The Glarn, for now, had been pacified, their warlike tendencies curtailed by the unexpected gift of human emotion. It wasn't a perfect solution, but in the realm of interstellar relations, perfection was about as common as a politician admitting they were wrong. As the Elysium Dawn continued its journey through the stars, Riven allowed himself a rare moment of introspection. He watched the cosmos drift by through the viewscreen, a vast tapestry of light and shadow, chaos and order. He knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but for now, they had earned a reprieve. Riven turned from the viewscreen, taking in the sight of his crew, each member an indispensable part of their ragtag family. They were a motley group, bound together by fate, luck, and a shared penchant for survival against all odds. And despite the universe's enduring attempts to break them, they endured, scrappy, irreverent, and determined to carve their own destiny. So, Captain, Jax called from his station, a wry grin on his face. What's our next move? Besides not dying, I mean. Riven leaned back in his chair, a contented sigh escaping his lips. For now, we ride this wave of joy, and if the universe tries to throw another curveball our way, we'll be ready to catch it with a smile. Right? Because nothing scares the cosmos more than a smiling human, Lyra quipped. Damn straight, Riven replied, a grin spreading across his face. Let's keep them guessing. And so the Elysium Dawn flew on, a ship of misfits and dreamers, defying the odds and daring the universe to do its worst. For as long as they had joy and each other, They knew they could weather any storm. And if the cosmos thought it could get the last laugh, it had another thing coming. After all, in the vast, indifferent expanse of space, sometimes the only thing standing between survival and oblivion was a crew willing to face the darkness with a smirk and a middle finger raised defiantly to the stars. Riven leaned back in the captain's chair, surveying his crew as they collectively exhaled the kind of relieved sigh usually reserved for dodging a space tax audit. The Elysium Dawn had survived yet another close call, and if the universe had any sense of decency, it owed them a round of drinks, or at least a temporary ceasefire with the Glarn, which was almost the same thing, minus the hangover. "All right, team," Riven announced, breaking the silence with the authority of someone who just cheated death with a smile. "We've managed to turn potential obliteration into a diplomatic victory. I'd say that calls for a small celebration." Lyra rolled her eyes, her fingers still tapping away at the joy synthesis console like she was composing a symphony of snark. "Celebration? How about a we're not dead yet cake? With existential dread frosting? Make it 2 layers." Jax chimed in from his station, hands greasy from coaxing the ship's propulsion system back from an early grave. "One for each time we nearly got vaporized today. Who knew saving the universe could be such a cakewalk?" Riven quipped, glancing at the view screen where the Glarn ship still hovered, their menace softened by a touch of human-induced euphoria. "What's next on the agenda, Captain?" Lyra asked, half listening as she programmed another dose of joy into their contingency cache. "Besides not dying, obviously." "Well," Riven said, rubbing his chin in mock contemplation, "now that we've given the Glarn a crash course in happiness, I suppose we should negotiate the terms of our new friendship. You know, before they decide to revert to their default setting of intergalactic hostility. Happiness, the ultimate weapon of mass distraction," Lyra mused, her cynicism tinged with genuine curiosity. "Do you think they'll actually follow through with it?" Riven shrugged, a smile playing on his lips. "Hard to say, but if we've learned anything today, it's that even the universe has a sense of humor. A dark, twisted sense of humor, sure, but it's there." Jax wiped his hands on a rag, glancing toward the flickering diagnostic screen. "Speaking of humor, the ship's diagnostics suggest we're holding together with optimism and duct tape. Might want to address that before our next impromptu encounter with death." "Thanks, Jax. I'll put that under the category of minor inconveniences," Riven said, waving a hand dismissively. "First, I want to make sure the Glarn don't suddenly get the urge to blow us to bits. Then we'll deal with the usual maintenance." Lyra leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "So, Riven, you ready to sweet-talk the Glarn into not killing us every time they get a less-than-friendly vibe?" "Absolutely," Riven replied with a confidence that could only be described as borderline reckless. "Besides, they're probably too curious about this whole happiness thing to start shooting." Riven activated the comms system, addressing the Glarn ambassador with the kind of easy charm that made him equally loved and loathed. "Ambassador Grath, I trust you're enjoying the effects of our little experiment." There was a pause, filled with the same kind of anticipation one feels while awaiting test results labeled urgent. Finally, Grath's voice crackled through, the usual edge softened. "Human Riven, you have introduced a perplexing variable. This joy. It is unlike anything we have encountered." "Glad to hear it," Riven said, nodding as if the ambassador could see him. "How about we make this a regular thing, trade a little emotion for a lot less tension?" Another pause, during which Riven imagined Grath's gelatinous form trying to comprehend the concept of mutual benefit. "Your proposition intrigues us. We shall consider this emotional alliance." "Fantastic," Riven replied, letting the relief seep into his voice. "Let's aim for understanding over annihilation. It's a much less messy option." Grath's response was a low rumble that might have been a chuckle. "Agreed, Human Riven. We will maintain this truce and study the effects of your emotional contagion further." As the comms went silent, Riven turned to his crew, his grin impossible to suppress. "Well, folks, it looks like we've stumbled into an interstellar peace treaty. Not bad for a day's work." Lyra shook her head, though her eyes sparkled with something akin to pride. "Leave it to you to weaponize happiness and negotiate peace in the same breath." "Hey, it's all about versatility," Riven said, leaning back with a satisfied sigh. "Now, let's see about getting this bucket of bolts back in working order, shall we?" Jack stood, stretching with a groan that suggested his back had declared independence. "I'll start with the propulsion system. It's been complaining louder than a politician during budget cuts." "Good man," Riven replied, watching his crew spring into action with the kind of camaraderie that came from mutual survival. "And Lyra, keep the joy synthesis running. Never know when we'll need another dose of happiness." "You got it, Captain," Lyra said, saluting with 2 fingers in a mock display of respect. "Here's to peace, joy, and not getting vaporized." As the crew dispersed to their respective tasks, Riven allowed himself a moment to savor the rare taste of victory. They'd done the impossible, transformed a potential bloodbath into a budding alliance. With a little luck and a lot of persistence, maybe they could keep it that way. The Elysium Dawn drifted through space, its patched hull and weary occupants a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. In the silence of the galaxy, Riven found solace in the knowledge that, for now, the universe had chosen to laugh with them rather than at them. And who knew? Maybe tomorrow would bring another curveball, another challenge, another chance to prove that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys could win. Riven joined Lyra at the joy synthesis console, watching the readouts with a kind of paternal pride. "You know, Lyra, I think we might just have turned a corner here." "Yeah," she replied, her voice tinged with a hint of disbelief. "It's almost like we're becoming the mediators of the cosmos. Who would have thought?" "Certainly not me," Riven said with a chuckle. "But I'll take it. Beats the hell out of the alternatives." Lyra nodded, her usual cynicism softened by a touch of hope. "So, what's next, Captain? Besides fixing our flying tin can and keeping the Glarn happy?" Riven considered the question, his gaze drifting to the stars outside the viewscreen. "I suppose we keep doing what we do best. Survive, adapt, and maybe, just maybe, make the universe a slightly better place." "Sounds like a plan," Lyra said, a small smile playing on her lips. "Here's to the next adventure." Riven watched her return to her work, feeling a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the joy synthesis. They were more than just a crew. They were a family, bound by shared experiences and the unyielding determination to carve their own path through the chaos of existence. With a renewed sense of purpose, Riven turned his attention back to the task at hand. There was still much to do, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a glimmer of optimism. Maybe the universe wasn't out to get them after all. Or maybe it was, and they'd simply learned how to outwit it at its own game. Either way, the Elysium Dawn was ready, its crew united by the belief that, against all odds, they could make a difference. They'd faced the darkness and emerged victorious, armed with nothing more than a smile and the courage to laugh in the face of adversity. As the ship continued its journey through the vast expanse of space, Riven knew one thing for certain: they were far from finished. There were still challenges to face, battles to fight, and victories to win. But with each other by their side, there was nothing they couldn't overcome. And so, with the stars as their witness and the universe as their playground, the crew of the Elysium Dawn set forth into the unknown, ready to take on whatever came their way with a smile and a middle finger defiantly raised to the cosmos. Because in the grand scheme of things, sometimes the simplest acts of defiance were the most powerful of all.